Okay, you've covered all of the general things. Now give me all of the secrets, the magic formula that I need to get my car down a no prep track. Hey, welcome back to Kevin Wilson SBC. I'm excited to be continuing the no prep series, the back of the track series for suspension tuning and getting your car down a no prep track. Like I said in the other video, I wish there was some magic formula where I could just give everyone some simple shock settings and some travel settings and weight bias and all this other stuff and make it so easy. But unfortunately, it's just not that easy. Let's jump in and let's talk about the front end of your race car. So many of us, we get so hung up on the rear chassis, and there's a lot of things happening on the rear end of the chassis. I'm not saying there's no reason not to be hung up on it. I'm just saying it's the recipe. It's the entire combination. I have talked about that for the last year and a half, almost 2 years since I've been doing this YouTube channel. It's all about the combination. These pieces work together in a great recipe. And one piece that people really tend to overlook is the front end and getting the front end set up, especially for no prep racing. So let's focus this video on the front end configuration of the suspension, and let's talk about some things that are important for no prep racing and for some setups that are going to help you with no prep racing. So let's jump into that. Real quick, before we jump into that, please subscribe to the channel. Please leave me a thumbs up. Front end. What's so important about the front end of your no prep car? Well, everything is important about the front end of your no prep car. Travel, front end travel, and the ability to transfer weight to the rear end of the car is absolutely critical. Here again, this isn't rocket science. I'm not saying anything that is not already very well known, I believe. But let's talk about some ways that this travel can help you and travel can hurt you. I also want to say this, there's a safety factor in front end travel, especially with vehicles that have A-arm type suspensions and ball joints. You can have too much front end travel to safely allow the ball joints to do their job. And you have to be aware that if you get an A-arm front end extended too much and you get those ball joints in a bind, even a strut front end, if you get things extended too much and you get your angles off, you will have trouble controlling the front end of that car. More importantly, steering. You can impact your ability to steer and recover that vehicle if you need to. Let's be very careful with understanding the limits of front end travel with regard to safety. On the 48 Ford, we have aftermarket upper A-arms, and because of the way those A-arms are built and they're tubular and they're hollow in the center, I can really extend the front end on the Ford if I unhook it and untie it. I've got it tied way down right now. I've got the front end physically limited right now with chains. But I can remove those chains and I can extend the front end on the 48 Ford a bunch. But when I get all the way extended, it's almost impossible to steer the car because of the angles the ball joints are in and what kind of pressure the ball joints are under. You have to find with your front end, where's that safety limit? You hear me say all the time, go fast, go straight, be safe. I end with be safe because I don't care how fast and straight you go, if you're not safe and you destroy your car, or even worse, you take your life or the life of someone else, then we failed miserably in our sport. So being safe, you have to determine where that safety zone is for your vehicle with regard to front end travel and how much front end travel you're going to be able to get into. Another factor with front end travel is toe in. The more you extend the front end, and depending on how much control you have on bump steer, And I have videos that go into more of this in detail on front end. They'll be in the description. But when you start having that kind of travel, if your steering linkage and your control arms, or however your front end is articulating, if those are not in a pretty decent arc together, you're going to be towing in and towing out those front wheels as your camber falls in and out based on bump steer. And if you're not aware of that and you get yourself in a situation where the alignment on that car looks really good at static ride height, but going down the track, and as you accelerate, your camber changes greatly, your toe in is changing, now you're creating, once again, an unsafe condition. Some of that is just inevitable. You cannot eliminate all bump steer with some of the front end rise and front end travel we're seeing in the sport of no prep racing today. But you have to find that happy median where you feel you have control of that front end, and you're controlling how much the toe in and camber is changing as that car is accelerating down the track. So I hope that makes sense. Those safety aspects are absolutely important. And to just recap on that, it's when's your front end going to bind and impact steering, your ability to properly steer the car, and bump steer geometry is very important to make sure you're not having a bunch of toe in changes as that car is going down the track, which will make the car very difficult to control and put you in the wall, or even worse, into your opponent's vehicle. One more safety item when it comes to the front end of your vehicle, especially the steering of your vehicle. Please eliminate all rubber rag joints. If you still are running a factory rubber rag joint on your steering column, please eliminate the rubber rag joint, especially with the amount of, let's face it, abuse we're putting the front suspension through with all of the articulation and the weight transfer and the rise. You can make a big difference in the safety of your life and others by replacing the rubber rag joint and using some steel or stainless steel double D joints, and eliminate any piece of rubber that can shear. I actually have a video of some very good friends of mine that put a 1969 Camaro into the wall when it was Orangeburg drag strip. I want you to take a look at this steering shaft that comes out of the firewall and goes down to the steering box, just a manual GM steering box. You will not see a rubber rag joint anywhere in this system. From the steering wheel, through the firewall, to the steering box is all solid. Why do we do that? Take a look at this video and see what happens when you have a rag joint. Because of how on the wheelie, and when it came down, and it shocked the front end so hard, and we had some bump steer going on that front end, that it sheared the rubber rag joint and sent the Camaro, fortunately, into the left wall in the left lane, and not going across the track into his opponent's lane. So rubber rag joints, you got to eliminate those, please, please, please. Safety in front end travel, these are things you've got to consider. All right, now here we go. We've talked about front end travel. As much front end travel as you can get in your car without binding up the steering, those are pluses. I'm looking for front end travel. And not every car has the same amount of travel. If your front end only has 4 inches of travel, we need every bit of 4 inches. If you can get 8 to 10 inches of travel, we're going to want to take advantage of 8 to 10 inches of travel. If you have limits on travel, they are what they are. As Turbo John would say, it is what it is. And those are just things you have to work with. The more front end travel you can safely incorporate into your car and not bind up the steering, That's where you need to be thinking, at least to start, and then start tuning the front end travel from there. Weight bias. If we can get close to 50-50 weight bias on the vehicle, man, that's going to be so nice. A lot of the cars that I work with and we help tune and set the chassis on, we're around 50 to 52 to 53% on the nose of the vehicle, on the front wheels, and then the rest on the rear. The more you can get to a 50-50 scenario on the front, so 50% of the race car's weight is on the front, 50% on the rear, now we're getting into the sweet spot for no prep. If we get a little more weight on the rear, and we can do 46-54, 46 on the front, 54 on the rear, man, now we're really kind of getting into a sweet no prep setup. So here, there's no magic answer. Like I said, on the 48 Ford, right now I'm running nearly 57.5% of the weight of the 48 Ford at 3,500 pounds with me in it is on the front end. That car is not no prep friendly. It works well on a prep track. It works well with big tire slicks on it, but that weight bias is not no prep friendly. I would really be chasing rabbits trying to make the 48 Ford to be competitive with that kind of weight on the front end in a real no prep back of the track event. So weight bias on the front end, I'm looking to get as much weight on the rear of the car. I can do a lot of creative things on the front end of the car with regard to weight. I can put taller wheels and tires on the front end of the car to take some of that rake out the car and bring some of that weight up higher and start shifting some of that weight to the rear end of the car. If you lift the front end, then you are moving weight to the rear end. Simple physics. And you can do that with taller wheels and taller tires. I can also manipulate rear weight with how much caster and caster offset I begin to run from left to right. I can move weight around on the front end of the car and in the right front or the left front or both and impact weight on the rear of the car. Having said that, I can change the height of the left front. I can bring the left front of the car up in physical height and move weight to the right rear, or I can take the right front of the car up and move weight to the left rear. Now, as the front end rises, if we begin to have a situation where one side is doing like a G-body shuffle, where you got the left side really coming up more than the right front, what you're doing is you're putting a lot of right rear weight in the car. So you're loading the right rear slick harder than the left rear slick, and generally that's going to drive the car to the left. If you have shocks that are not valved the same, or you have, for instance, the right front is coming up much quicker and hitting the shock limits faster than the left front, you're actually moving weight to the left rear of the car, which can drive the car to the right. And there are times where you have to manipulate the front end to control weight transfer on the hit and as you are accelerating down the track. And you have to understand the physics at play. It's not rocket science. It's really not physics. It's simple math where, one corner change impacts the opposite rear corner inversely. So if I lower the right front more than the left front, I'm actually pulling weight off of, if I lower the right front more than the left front, I'm pulling weight off of the left rear. This is where scales are so critical as you begin to manipulate your chassis and see how your chassis responds to these changes. And some of these small changes on the front end of the car, even though it's static changes, translate more so when you accelerate or when you hit the suspension and the front end starts to come up. So be aware that weight bias and weight transfer on the front is absolutely critical with understanding what's happening with your car. The camber, the caster, and the toe end. 3 key components of a front end alignment will absolutely hurt or help you determine how weight is placed. Now, I haven't got into external weight placement. We're not even talking about that yet. There are times where you're going to need to add weight around on a no prep car to help the weight transfer and weight bias. Absolutely. I think everyone understands that. That's not in this video though. I'm talking about impacting 4-corner weights with simple front end changes, alignment changes, caster changes, and height changes based on how your car is responding. And I haven't touched on caster a lot. I have a video on front end alignments, but I can add caster to one side or the other. Now you have to be careful with this, because if you get your caster too offset in the front, you will actually start driving your car left or right based on which tire has more caster. But I can make very small changes in caster and move weight around on the front end very quickly. When it comes to motor placement, I'm going to try to set the motor as close to the factory firewall as possible. A lot of the stuff we do and a lot of the no prep guys we help are still running a factory firewall. We have seen no prep cars, full tube chassis, modified firewalls. I mean, freaking pretty much pro mods trying to run on no prep. I'm not going to get into that. But the no prep racing we enjoy the most is, steel body cars, factory floorboards, factory firewalls. So in that instance, I'm going to try to get the motor as far back as I can without having to cut in to the factory firewall. If you're adding components like turbos, I'm going to want the turbos higher up in the engine bay and as far back as they can reasonably go. I'm trying to impact the front weight bias as much as possible by moving as much as the weight behind the front wheels and closer to the center of gravity of that vehicle. So the engine placement, I'm going to have it probably set up a little higher than a full track car would have their engine placed. I'm also going to try to move the weight back. We always do that in drag cars or no prep or anyways, but I'm going to try to take advantage of that as much as possible and get that mid plate as close to the rear end center line as I can without impacting the integrity of that factory firewall. So at a high level, the front end weight bias, I'm trying to get as close to 50% or less of the weight on the front of the vehicle. Like I said, that's not going to happen a lot of the times. Most vehicles are going to be more nose heavy, but this is where we'll have a video series talking about weight placement and adding weight, lead weight at different places of the car to help with the weight bias and transfer on a no prep event. Right now, I'm not talking about weight placement. I'm talking about working with the vehicle's weight that is available to us on the chassis. So we've talked about as much travel as we can safely get without binding up the front suspension steering and without causing too much bump steer problems. Even with bump steer kits, with the kind of front end travel we have these days in the no prep racing scene, bump steer is just going to be there, and you need to understand how your car is going to react and how are you going to steer through that and handle that bump steer in different events. And in general, on a no prep car, when you think of a full prep track car to a no prep car, as you go from full prep to no prep, and I've said this in other videos as well, generally the more loose and free you're going to want the suspension on your vehicle to be able to move weight around under load, and as you command power and being able to put that weight transfer to use to try to keep that slick planted to the back of the track or the no prep surface or the street. In relation to the front weight bias and transfer of weight, these springs on the front come into play big time, big time. This is why the Mustangs work so well, right? You have the strut front end, and you can have long struts on the front with lots of travel, and the springs that you run on the front of a no prep vehicle are going to be as long and light as I can safely run without overrunning the shock or not allowing the suspension to settle back down without bottoming out the shock. So the springs on the front of your vehicle, I'm going to want as long a spring as possible and as light a spring as possible so that I can have much more stored energy. If I can run a 14-inch and spring up front versus a 12-inch or 10-inch spring, I'm going to go with a 14-inch and I'm going to bring the weight of the spring down. I don't want the spring fully collapsed and coil bound, but I'm going to be pretty close to that area with a full no prep car to start off. My baseline is going to be as light a spring as I can safely run without impacting the safety of the front end and the integrity of the shocks. Like in my 48 Ford, it's a G-body front end, and the car is so heavy on the front, I'm having to run a very heavy front spring just to safely support the front end of the vehicle. And it's an 8-inch spring on the front, and I'm not running that in no prep. If I was going to try to run that car in no prep, I would go with a 10 or 12-inch front spring, and then I would have a lot more stored energy. You will have more stored energy in a lighter, longer spring than a shorter, stiffer spring, and that stored energy, as you accelerate, it's going to take a lot less pounds per inch to open that spring and move the weight to the rear. So if you have, for instance, a 150-pound 14-inch spring, and you collapse that thing 6 inches, then you got 150 pounds per inch at 6 inches, and you have a spring that's 250 pounds that only collapses half that, or close to half that. It takes a lot less energy to extend the 150-pound spring than it does to extend the 250-pound spring. And what you're doing is you're helping get the front end coming up and moving the weight to the rear end, which is where you need the weight to help keep the slick planted. Okay, let's talk about shocks. This is where we always want to take our focus. These shocks are a very important piece of this entire front recipe. All of these things here, travel, front weight by Awesome, weight transfer, and my spring selections, all these go into the recipe for the shocks that I'm going to run on the front of my no prep car. I'm not going to sit here and try to sell you a shock I like more than the other. There are lots of great shock manufacturers out there. Yes, I have a tendency to lean towards Penske. I love the Penske racing shocks. They have worked amazing on the 48 Ford. But there are also other shock manufacturers out there. And I hear a lot of people say, well, I don't want to go spend so much money on just a pair of shocks. I got so much money in all these other places. I just want to, run the cheapest shocks I can get. Well, why would you take and spend all this time engineering all of this and then expect a set of 90-10 shocks to do everything you need them to do? I cannot tell you how many people have contacted me over the last year and a half talking about their 90-10 shocks on the front of their vehicle and what do I recommend they do. And 100% of the time, I'm going to recommend that you get yourself a good quality pair of front shocks that are double adjustable. I prefer double adjustable shocks. I have several videos on Penske, Strange Engineering, Viking, QA1. I have many different videos that you can go and look on my channel that talk about all these different shocks and shock valving. Not all shocks are created equal. And it's amazing to me how many people do not understand which valving packs they have in their Viking shocks. I asked them, are they Crusaders or are they Warriors? And they're double adjustable. Okay, well, there's a lot that goes into the shocks, and you really should take time to understand your shocks and what's the dyno graph of your shocks, and what does a click really mean on your shock, and how does that translate to what's going on. With regard to the front end, I'm going to be looking for some shocks that have some decent rebound or extension valving and some pretty strong compression valving. And here's a gold nugget on the front end of your vehicle that will definitely impact or upset the rear end traction on your car. I am looking for a shock that on the hit will allow the front end to come up but not top the shock out until I'm past or right at the 60-foot line. That's ideal for me. You will see so many cars that on the hit, before they can even get the rear tires past the starting line, the front end has come all the way up, tops the shock out, grabs all the weight of the unsprung weight on the front. And when that happens and that front end comes up and tops the shock out, and then all that weight hits that car on a no prep track now, where you're trying to keep weight on the rear end, when the front end of the car comes up and cannot come up any longer or any further, there's only one place for that front end to come, and that's back down. And when a car is on the hit and you're driving the rear wheels down to the track and forward, and the front end is coming up and it catches all the weight, the shocks are fully extended, and your springs have allowed that thing to come up, and you hit all that weight, when the front end starts to nose down, you're immediately pulling weight off the rear end. Now you're going to introduce wheel speed on the rear of your car, and wheel speed in a no prep track event or back of the track event is your enemy. If you can't immediately get the wheel speed under control and eliminate that wheel speed in a true no prep track, you're in trouble. And more than likely at that point, that little bit of unloading and wheel speed in no prep events today, you've lost the race. Let me say this again. I need a shock that has enough rebound and extension valve, and rebound and extension are the same thing. And I say rebound because most of the time the knobs or the adjustments are labeled R and C, rebound, extension, compression, bump. I need a shock on the front end of the car where I can have enough clicks in it. I'm not trying to lock the front end down. I need the front end to come up, but I need it to come up slow enough until it doesn't top out the shock until the 60-foot mark or longer. I mean, if I can have the front end keep coming up to 80 to 100 feet out, that's great too. Now, here's where I can't give you the magic formula for your car. I don't know how many clicks that may be for you. I don't know what shocks you're running. You can have Strange Engineering shocks on the front of your car that you bought from Strange Engineering off the shelf, and someone else can have the exact same Strange Engineering shocks and 6 clicks from full tight or 6 clicks from full soft may be something very different in their car than your car. I am not the shock guru where I can just tell you which clicks are right. If you give me the information on your vehicle and I understand what kind of valving you have, I can give you a good place to start. But then you're going to have to look at your data, you're going to have to look at your video, you're going to have to study the video, study the data, make some incremental educated changes, and then go retest, re-video, and check that out. On the rebound extension side, I need the front end coming up, and I need it coming up, but not so fast that it tops out too quick. Ideally, if I can have the front end keep coming up for the first 1.5 to 2 seconds of a no prep event, man, I'm golden. I can work with that. If the front end comes up and tops out the shock, and you're a half second into your run, it's not going to go well for you more than likely. Unless you're topping out the front end of the shock and you've got so much rear end traction that you're pulling the front wheels off the ground, then even at that point, you're really wasting energy and you're wasting momentum with the car coming up so fast and not going forward. So I hope that makes sense. Let's pause here for a second. That extension valving, there has to be a happy spot here. Now, a lot of times we forget about the old compression knob on the front end. Well, that compression knob is also your friend and a part of the entire recipe of the shocks. So we have rebound and we have compression. I want the front end to come up, and I want it to keep coming up for the first 1.5 to 2 seconds of the no prep run. And the compression valving, I need to have enough valving to keep the shock extended. I don't want to have a shock that has no compression grunt and it's just going to allow the front end to start coming back down. I want the front end to come up, and I want to keep the front end up as much as possible all the way through the run. I don't want the front end doing this. I don't want a car bouncing the front end down the track, because now I'm changing the camber, I'm changing toe, I'm putting weight on the rear, I'm taking weight off, putting weight, taking weight off. I want the car to have a smooth rise, and I want the front end to come up, and I want to keep it up through the run until I lift and take more control of the front end. And I'm going to keep the front end up with compression valving. We're extending the shock, and now I'm telling the shock, I want you to have more resistance. I don't want the shock to compress right away. So generally, depending on what shock manufacturer you're running and what valving they put in your shock, those are the theories, those are the principles that you're trying to accomplish with the front end shock, struts, whatever you're running. That's the front end suspension mystery, if you want to call it a mystery. These valvings and these shocks, here again, are what help control the reaction of the front end. The front end's going to come up and the front end's going to come down. But I'm going to use the shocks to help control the timing of those events. I want the shocks to help me control how fast it comes up, and I want the shock compression to help me control how well I'm going to keep the shock up once I get the shock extended. I don't want it to just compress right away. And I can't tell you what clicks that is for your shocks. You can start with some educated decisions on that if we know the valving and you have shocks that have dynographs. If you're running shocks and you don't have dynographs on them, call the manufacturer. Ask them to help you understand what would each click mean on your shocks. Some shocks you can have 20 clicks, 18 clicks. Some can have 40 clicks. I don't care how many clicks you have. What does each click do? And how do those clicks impact what you're trying to have the shocks do to time the event of extension and the event of the shock recompressing on the other end of the track and on the shutdown area? Once again, I'm not going to be able to help you a lot with a set of 90-10 shocks. We used to run 90-10 shocks 25, 30, 35 years ago. But we weren't making the kind of power we're making these days. We didn't have the kind of slicks and the technology and slicks that we have today. We didn't have the computer control and being able to pull all this timing and bleed off boost. We didn't have all that 25, 30 years ago when the 90-10 shocks were so popular in drag racing. And yes, I can have a street car with 90-10s on the front and some good shocks, decent shocks on the rear, and we can have a good time. But I'm just going to tell you, to be competitive in the no prep world today and the kind of horsepower and times that people are running in no prep events today, even back at the track events, you're going to really struggle with a set of 90-10s on the front. You're going to have to graduate into more mature shock lines. It boggles my mind. We will spend tens of thousands of dollars on computers and motors and transmissions and converters and rear end, but we just cannot make ourselves spend $1,000 on a set of shocks or $1,200 on a set of shocks. Quite frankly, I would rather have more money in my shocks and have the proper valving and know what I'm doing to tune the timing of the suspension movement and spend less money in other places. These shocks are so critical to your tuning of the front end. Another aspect of the front shocks and the front end travel and weight transfer, the whole recipe. Let's say you have a shock on the front that is not performing like the other shock. Let's say you have, and you watch your video and you see the rear end or the front end is not reacting the same left to right. There are times, based on the condition and what's happening at that time and what your data is telling you, you may have to stagger some shock settings from left to right to compensate for some twist, or maybe a shock that's going bad or a shock that's been damaged, what have you. You have to really sit back and understand how much impact that front end has on the traction of your drag car. And if things start getting uneven on the front end of that car, you're going to start driving your car left or right. Yes, we almost 99.99% of us run a rear anti-roll bar. And God, I hope so at least. And with that rear anti-roll bar, you can really compensate for that twist. However, when you start staggering your anti-roll bar and you start moving weight around with that, you can start chasing that rabbit very quickly, and you will start getting very frustrated. Generally on my car, I start off with the anti-roll bar neutral with the driver in the car. I want the anti-roll bar fairly neutral, and then I may add a 1/2 to 3/4 of a turn of preload on the right rear, because on the 48 Ford it wanted to bring the left front up much quicker, which was really trying to dip over the right rear of the car. So I would raise the right rear anti-roll bar just a little bit, so that when it tried to do that, it would actually move the weight to the left rear of the car. You have to experiment and see the changes these changes make in your vehicle. I'm just telling you what I had to do for the 48 Ford because of the amount of roll the chassis had in it. I've seen a lot of guys, when I get their cars in the shop, their cars driving left. It's just driving left, Kevin. I can't make the car stop driving left. And I will see them jack the left rear anti-roll bar and they'll lengthen it, thinking they're moving weight on the left rear of the car. But really what they're doing, if you look at the car from the rear end, when they jack the left rear up, they're actually leaning the chassis to the right. And on the leave, it's going to push the right down even harder, plant the right slick harder, and drive the car to the left more. So a lot of times it's just the opposite of what your first tendency is. And, if I have a car that's got a lot of roll like that, I'm going to actually tighten up the right rear anti-roll bar. And when I say tighten up, I'm going to extend it. I'm going to lengthen it a little bit more than the left rear. And it's going to want to, as it tries to roll, it's going to move that weight around. Guys, I don't know how to explain that a whole lot better than the whole combination. And the point I'm trying to make is, if your front end is moving around on you left or right differently, if things aren't under control on the front end and you got one side moving quicker than the other side or what have you, you will and you can start impacting and driving your car left or right, depending on what that front end's doing. So I just wanted to pause here for a minute and talk about some of these aspects. And I know we're all wanting to get to the rear suspension of no prep, and we're going to get there, but we got to keep laying the foundation before we can get to the rear suspension. So we've covered some very key components of the front end of your no prep drag car. We're looking for as much travel as we can safely get. We need to be aware of binding up ball joints or binding up articulating points that are going to make your vehicle too hard to steer. Be careful. You can get in trouble quickly. We're going to be careful and cognizant of bump steer. With all the travel and articulation we have going on, we really need to make sure we're keeping the toe in line with the camber changes as all these pieces articulate. We're going to eliminate rubber rag joints. Any rubber rag joints, please, we're going to eliminate those and put steel or stainless steel or chrome moly joints in place. front weight bias, we're trying to get as much weight on the rear of the vehicle. We're trying to get as much weight off of the nose of the car, and whatever weight we gotta have in the front, I wanna have it up a little higher, and I wanna have it as far back as we can get it. I don't think that's earth-shaking or anything not well known there. We're going to have as light and long a spring as possible on the front to promote the weight transfer, promote the front end rise, but yet keep control of the weight of the car as we're going down the track. And some front ends are more limited than others, and you're going to have to just figure out where your limits are in front end travel. But I'm going to need a softer, longer spring on the front of the vehicle. That's where we're going to start, and we're going to see how the car reacts. Now, in relation to the springs and the shocks, I'm looking for some shocks that are going to meet the horsepower requirements, the front end travel and weight transfer I'm looking for, with the right valving of rebound and compression. I need the front end coming up, and I need it to keep coming up for the first 1.5 to 2 seconds, the first 60 to 80 feet. I'm trying to keep the front end coming up, coming up, coming up. It's going to top out, and I'm going to use the compression to hold it there and not let the front end just start coming back down on me around mid-track, because if you start having the front end come back down on you and you're coming to mid-track and you're hitting a shift point, more than likely you're going to introduce some wheel speed, and you really should have used more compression to keep the front end of that car more supported and not let that weight start coming back down. That's so critical, because as the front end comes up, when it can't come up anymore, and if we come up too fast, too soon, and we don't have enough momentum to hold the car up and enough gearing to keep the car up, the minute the front end starts to come back down and that nose starts coming back down, we're going to unload the rear and we're going to gain wheel speed. So these pieces are absolutely critical to the front end recipe of a no prep drag racer. I got many more videos to come. We're going to be tying all this together more. There's some pieces I haven't talked about yet that can be related to the front end, but as we progress through this video series, I'm going to come back to these, and I'm going to be adding a few more pieces onto this puzzle. Hope that this has helped. I hope that you will continue to follow the series. I enjoy this type of work. I enjoy sharing this with you guys, and I'm excited about maybe, first of all, helping people demystify some of this, and more importantly, keeping people safe and growing our sport. I love our sport. I love drag racing, and I want to keep us safe, and I want to help racers not be so frustrated and help us have more competition, because the more competition, the better we're all going to get. And the safer we can be, then that just is icing on the cake, because everyone gets to live and go home, be with their spouses and their kids and their family members. So thank you for watching this video, and remember, all this is in an effort to do three things. We're trying to go fast, we're trying to go straight, and we're trying to be safe.